Hey everyone, I'm Jack, and it's great to be here with you today. We're going to be talking about training your brain to think in English. And to help us with that, we have a fantastic expert, Elena, joining us. Elena is an expert in language acquisition and brain training.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena, and it's so nice to be here today.
Now, for all of you out there learning English, we know it can be really tough to actually get your brain to think in English, especially if you're just starting out.
It can be a real challenge.
It can feel like you're always translating in your head, which can be slow and frustrating.
You're so right. A lot of people experience that. It's like having a wall between you and being fluent. But the good news is that with the right practice and the right techniques, you can actually train your brain to think in English more easily.
And that's what we're here to help you with today. We're going to talk about some really practical tips to help you get started thinking in English. We want to make this journey of learning English feel more like an adventure and less like something you have to do.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about changing your mindset and looking at English as something positive and exciting.
I completely agree. So let's get started. Let's talk about our first tip. And it's all about baby steps. You don't have to jump into big, complicated thoughts in English right away.
Right. Start small, simple things. Think about things you do every day, but in English.
So I don't know, I'm going to make dinner.
Exactly. Or I need to buy groceries, little things like that. And what's great about this tip is you can do it anytime, anywhere.
You're just going about your day and you start to think about what you're doing in your head, but in English.
Yes. You start to create pathways in your brain for English. And what's even better is when you start to make it a habit.
Oh, a habit.
Like if you see a table, don't just think of the word in your own language. Think table in English.
Yeah,
Over and over, and it will become easier.
that makes a lot of sense. So moving on to the next tip, it's about immersing yourself in English. Going beyond textbooks and trying to incorporate English into your everyday life as much as possible.
And this is where it gets fun. Think about surrounding yourself with English, listening to music, watching movies, maybe reading news articles in English.
This is a good tip. So for those of you who are beginners, what kind of media would you recommend? Where would be a good place to start?
It's a great question. When it comes to news, you can start with websites and apps designed for beginners. They use simpler English, good for starting out. And for movies and TV shows, maybe start with subtitles in your own language. As you get more comfortable, switch to English subtitles.
Music is such a great way to learn English. It's so fun to sing along, and it doesn't even matter if you don't understand every single word when you first start out.
It's true. The music can help you get used to how words sound. And it's something you can do anywhere. Another good tip is to repeat lines you hear in music or movies.
Just repeat. Okay.
It helps to make what you're learning stick. So it's really about making English a part of your life, not just something you study.
Got it. Okay. So I think it's good to move to our next tip. We're going to talk about the power of speaking English out loud. Now, I know this can be scary for some people,
It can be intimidating,
especially when you're just beginning to learn English.
but trust me, it's such a valuable tool.
It's so easy to just stay in your head when you're learning,
Yeah,
but actually saying the words out loud is so important.
it is. Speaking out loud strengthens those connections in your brain, making it easier to think in English. And you can do this when you're alone.
Oh, so it doesn't have to be with another person.
No, not at all. You could be doing something like, I don't know, washing the dishes and just think, I am washing the dishes.
In English.
In my head. Oh, yes. You can even practice introducing yourself. Imagine you meet someone new. What would you say? You can practice this in front of the mirror, even record yourself speaking. It's about getting comfortable with making sentences.
You don't have to get it perfect when you first start.
You're so right. Making mistakes is one of the best ways to learn.
Yeah. So let's move on to a tip that I think can really help you to communicate more quickly, and that is to start learning common English phrases.
Yes.
Think of them as shortcuts.
Exactly. Instead of trying to figure out a whole sentence, you can just use the phrase.
So instead of it's nice to meet you, hello, it's just nice to meet you.
Exactly.
There's so many helpful phrases you can learn, like how to say, excuse me, or I don't understand. Things you might need every day.
Right. And it's important to be polite when you're using them. Like if you need to get someone's attention, you would say, excuse me.
Excuse me.
Right.
This is a great tip. Okay, let's move on to a technique I find really interesting called shadowing. This is where you mimic native English speakers.
This can really improve your pronunciation, your intonation, and how fluent you sound. You're essentially trying to copy how they speak, word for word.
So it's like I'm trying to copy their voice, speed, their accent even.
Yes. You're training your mouth and your brain to make the sounds of English naturally.
What kind of material do you recommend for shadowing?
You can use anything you enjoy. It could be your favorite movie, a podcast, even a song.
Do you think it's better to start with short sentences or go straight into like a whole paragraph?
I think it's best to start small and work your way up.
Okay, start small,
Hmm.
short. I bet repetition is really important here. The more you do it, the better you'll get.
The more you repeat, the more you internalize the sounds and rhythms.
So we've talked about a lot of tips where you practice by yourself, but I want to talk about real conversations.
Absolutely.
I know this could be a big step, but I really believe it's where you see the biggest changes.
I agree. There's nothing like talking with a real person. When you have conversations, you get feedback, you hear how people respond, and you become more confident.
You really learn how to use the language in a real-life setting.
Exactly. It forces you to use what you've learned. What about those of us who don't have any English-speaking friends or colleagues?
That's a good question. How can we find opportunities to practice?
There are so many resources online, platforms and communities designed for language exchange. Connect with people from all over the world, all learning English. You could search for English conversation groups in your local area, too.
It's all about finding an environment where you feel comfortable and can try speaking without feeling self-conscious.
Right. And every conversation, even a short one, helps you learn.
So we've talked about a lot of active techniques, but I think it's important to take time to reflect on your progress, track how you're doing.
That's so important. And one way to do that is to start writing a journal in English. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a few sentences about your thoughts and experiences.
So I can kind of see how my vocabulary is growing and how my sentences are becoming more natural.
Right. And when you go back and look at your older entries, you can see how much progress you've made, which can be encouraging.
It's like looking back on your journey and seeing how far you've come. Do you think it's good to set goals?
Absolutely. It keeps you focused and motivated. It's much easier to work towards something specific. Maybe you want to learn 5 new words every week, or maybe you want to have a 5-minute conversation in English with a native speaker.
So it's like having a target to aim for.
Exactly. These kinds of goals help to give you a sense of direction.
I really like how we're bringing together all these different strategies. It's so much more than just studying vocabulary or grammar rules.
It is. It's about creating a well-rounded approach, being active, thinking about what you're doing, and setting goals. And now I want to talk about something that might seem a little surprising, but can really help boost your brain power. Physical exercise.
Physical exercise.
It might sound strange, but it's true. When you exercise, you increase the blood flow to your brain. This helps you focus better, improves your memory, and can even make you feel happier.
It's like giving your brain a workout, too.
You could think of it that way. And you don't have to do anything too strenuous. Simply going for a walk or doing some yoga can make a difference.
I know that when I take a break from studying to go for a walk, I always feel more energized when I come back.
That's because exercise releases these chemicals called endorphins. They improve your mood and help you to feel less stressed, which is helpful when you're learning.
Yeah, learning can be stressful.
So we shouldn't just be focused on sitting at our desks and studying.
Got it. We should be taking care of our bodies, too. So now I want to talk about another way that you can stimulate your brain, and that is through hobbies, creative things that you enjoy.
This is so important. Anything that you find fun and that challenges you mentally keeps your brain active. It could be playing music, painting, drawing, or even learning to cook something new.
So it's like giving your brain a playground.
I love that analogy. And it's about doing things you enjoy, not because you have to.
I think that's such a good point to make.
It is. It's about your well-being.
We've been talking about learning English, but it's not just about sitting down and studying. It's about taking care of your mind and body. I think this is a good place for us to pause for now.
Sounds good.
We've talked about so many helpful things, and I want to give our listeners a chance to think about everything we've covered.
We've given everyone a lot to think about.
And we'll be back soon to continue our discussion on the best tips and tricks for learning to think in English.
Welcome back, everyone.
It's great to be back.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to continue our discussion about training your brain to think in English.
We talked about things like immersing yourself in the language and speaking out loud.
Yeah, we did. I kind of want to go a little bit deeper into something that can be a real challenge.
Fix that.
Translating everything in your head. It's like a wall between you and actually thinking in English.
It's so common, especially for beginners. Our brains are just used to our native language.
So how can we break out of that habit? How do we stop translating and start thinking in English directly?
You have to retrain your brain, little by little, like breaking down a wall one brick at a time. Using those tips we talked about, immersing yourself, practicing thinking and speaking, it actually changes how your brain works.
Creates those new pathways.
Yes. And, the more you practice, the easier it becomes. Another thing I see is people getting stuck thinking they need to know every single word before they can think in English.
Oh, yeah. I can see how that would be a problem. You're trying to think, but then you get stuck because you don't know a word.
It happens. Don't let it discourage you.
So what should you do?
Well, first, don't panic. Take a moment and see if you can think of another word that's close. A similar meaning.
So it doesn't have to be the exact perfect word, just something that's good enough to get my thought across.
Exactly. Keep thinking in English. Don't switch back. You can always note down the word you didn't know and look it up later. Don't let it stop you.
So we've talked about not translating and not letting yourself get stuck if you don't know a word. What else can help?
Try to visualize what you're thinking about.
What do you mean visualize?
Create a picture in your mind. Don't just think the words, think the image.
So if I'm thinking of like the word beach,
Okay.
I would actually picture a sandy beach, the ocean, palm trees, like that.
Perfect example. You're making a stronger connection.
It's like a picture dictionary in my head.
I like that. Another thing is to talk to yourself in English.
You mean like have a conversation with myself?
It might sound a little strange, but it really helps to practice.
How does that work?
It's a conversation with your own thoughts. It helps you see where you have trouble explaining something. And you're practicing making sentences. Don't worry about making mistakes. No one can hear you.
So it's practice for a real conversation.
Exactly. You can talk about your day, make plans, comment on things around you.
You could work through problems, decisions, all that.
Right. Saying it out loud can help you understand things more clearly. Speaking of understanding, I think motivation is so important.
Yeah, especially with language learning. It takes a lot of work.
It does. And it's easy to get excited at first, but then that can fade.
Ah,
How do you stay motivated when things get tough?
it's a good question.
Set realistic goals. Don't expect to be fluent overnight. Break it down into smaller steps. Then reward yourself when you reach a goal.
Oh, like instead of trying to do everything at once, I set a goal like learn 10 new words this week, and then when I do, I don't know, watch a movie or something. Something I enjoy.
Exactly. It's about recognizing your effort and celebrating those achievements, no matter how small. Keeps you positive.
That's like a little pat on the back. What else can help?
Having a reason for learning. Why are you learning English? What do you want to do with it?
Travel, get a better job, have conversations, all kinds of things.
Exactly. Having a purpose keeps you going even when you don't feel like it.
It becomes about more than just the language.
Yes. And one more thing. Surround yourself with supportive people.
Friends, family, other people learning English.
People who understand how hard you're working and can cheer you on.
It's like a cheer squad for your English learning.
I love that.
So we've talked about support, but I want to talk about the environment.
The environment is so important.
I feel like people often forget about that.
It's true. The environment can have a huge impact on your learning.
So what makes a good environment?
Most important is a space free from distractions. A quiet room, phone turned off, anything that might tempt you to multitask.
Oh, the distractions are everywhere these days.
They are. Minimize those so you can focus.
So it's not just the physical place, but your mental state too.
Yes. Have a positive attitude. Approach it with curiosity. Be open to making mistakes.
Mistakes are part of learning.
They really are. Believe that you can learn and you will make progress. And remember, it's a journey.
Don't expect results right away.
Right. Focus on the process and have fun with it. Learning should be enjoyable.
That leads perfectly to what I want to talk about next, technology. We live in a digital age. There's so many resources available to help.
Absolutely. Technology can be so powerful for learning English.
Like apps for vocabulary, grammar, all that.
Exactly. And there are apps that can connect you with other English learners to practice speaking. It's like having a tutor in your pocket.
Always available. Besides apps, what else would you recommend?
Online dictionaries, translation tools, they're so useful for those moments when you come across a word you don't know. Available anytime.
Super convenient.
And of course, technology for immersing yourself in the language.
Movies, music, all that.
Streaming services, online platforms, you have access to so much English content. You can find something that matches your level and interests. What about virtual reality? I've heard that can be helpful.
Oh yeah, VR.
VR creates such an immersive experience. It's like you're in a different place.
And how does that help with English?
You can practice things like ordering food or having a conversation at work, all in a safe environment.
So you can practice without worrying about making a mistake in front of someone.
Exactly. Another technology that's becoming really popular is AI.
I hear about AI a lot, but I don't really know how it works for learning.
AI tools can give you personalized feedback, tailor lessons to your needs, and even have conversations with you.
So it's like a personal English teacher, always there.
Right. And AI is always evolving, so we can expect even more amazing tools in the future. But what about people who are worried that technology makes them lazy?
That's a good point.
It's a tool, not a replacement for learning.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly. It's great for things like vocabulary and grammar, but you also need to challenge yourself and think critically.
So technology can help, but it's not the whole story. Now I want to talk about fluency. You can know lots of words and understand grammar, but speaking smoothly and confidently is a whole other thing.
It's true. Fluency takes time and practice.
So how do we become more fluent?
Practice speaking as much as possible. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Everyone does. It's how we learn.
Just go for it.
Yes. Also, listen carefully to how native speakers talk. Their rhythm, intonation, pronunciation. Try to imitate that.
So I get used to the sounds and start to sound more natural myself.
Exactly. Remember shadowing. That's great for fluency too.
Starting to see how all these tips work together.
It's a whole approach and expanding your vocabulary.
More words, more ways to express yourself.
Like a bigger toolbox. And of course, grammar.
The rules.
It's important, like the blueprint for building a house. But don't get discouraged if you don't become fluent right away.
Be patient.
Exactly. Keep practicing learning and celebrate your progress. Now let's talk about some common challenges people face.
It's not always easy. It can be frustrating.
One of the biggest is feeling overwhelmed. English has so many words, the grammar can be tricky.
Especially at the beginning.
So how do you deal with that feeling? Take it one step at a time, break it down into smaller pieces.
So if grammar feels overwhelming, I could just focus on learning one rule at a time.
Exactly. Be patient, build that strong foundation, and then there's the fear of making mistakes.
Everyone's afraid of making mistakes.
A lot of people won't speak English because they're afraid of making a mistake.
It can be embarrassing.
But you have to remember, everyone makes mistakes. They're actually a good thing.
How can a mistake be good?
It means you're trying, you're learning. Learn from it and keep going.
It's about changing how we see mistakes. Not as failures, but as opportunities.
You got it. And sometimes the biggest challenge of all is confidence.
So many people are shy about their English.
Confidence is key to fluency. How do we get it?
That's the big question.
Focus on your accomplishments. Celebrate even the small successes. Give yourself credit for the work you're doing.
It's easy to forget to do that.
And remember to be patient. Confidence takes time. What about finding time to practice? Everyone's so busy.
Work, family, all of that.
Even small amounts of time can be useful. Listen to a podcast, watch a show, even practice vocabulary while you're waiting in line.
Just fit it in wherever you can.
Exactly. You don't need hours and hours. Then there's finding the right resources. So many apps, websites, textbooks. Where do you even start?
It's overwhelming.
Find what matches your learning style, your goals, and your interests.
If I'm a visual learner, maybe I need flashcards or videos. If I'm an auditory learner, maybe podcasts or audiobooks.
Exactly. Experiment. See what works best. Ask other people. See what they use. And if you have a teacher, ask for their advice. And then, of course, there's staying motivated.
A long game.
It can be tough. Set clear goals and track your progress.
Like, if I want to read a book in English, I break it down. Read a chapter a week. That way I can see myself moving forward.
Yes. And celebrate those successes. Reward yourself. And most importantly, have fun. If you don't enjoy it, you won't stick with it.
That's a great point. It's about finding the joy. Now, I want to talk about some things you might not expect. Things that can help your English even when you're not studying.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Have you ever thought about your personality?
My personality, how's that connected to learning English?
I think people who are naturally curious and open to new experiences might find it easier.
I can see that. More willing to try new things.
Right. And people who are outgoing and enjoy talking to others might find it easier to practice.
They'll look for opportunities to use it.
So if you're more introverted, you might need to find other ways to practice, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
Talking to yourself, shadowing, things like that.
Different strokes for different folks.
What about learning styles? We hear a lot about that.
There are so many. Some learn by listening, others by reading, others by doing.
So if I'm visual, I might watch movies or use flashcards. If I'm auditory, maybe podcasts or audiobooks.
Exactly. Know your style and find what works best for you.
I think it's also important to know your strengths and weaknesses.
What do you mean?
Maybe you're great at grammar, but pronunciation is tough.
Mm-hmm.
Or you have lots of words, but speaking fluently is hard.
Knowing yourself as a learner.
Right. Then you can focus on what you need to work on. What about your cultural background?
Cultural background.
Do you think that affects language learning?
I hadn't really thought about it before, but it makes sense.
Different cultures communicate differently,
That's true.
and sometimes those differences can cause problems or make it harder to learn.
Like what?
Well, in some cultures, it's rude to interrupt, but in others, it's totally normal.
It's true. Even body language can be different.
Fascinating how much culture influences communication. So how do we deal with those differences?
Be aware of them. Recognize that they exist and try to understand them.
Be open-minded.
Yes. And don't be afraid to ask questions if you're not sure. It's better to ask. And remember, language is always changing.
Always evolving.
New words, phrases, all the time. It's a living thing.
It's challenging, but also exciting.
Right. Always something new. Speaking of different things, we should talk about varieties of English.
British, American, Australian, all that.
They all have their own accents, vocabulary, even grammar sometimes.
It can be a bit confusing at first.
I think it's helpful to focus on one when you're starting out.
So pick one and stick with it until I'm comfortable.
That can be helpful. But eventually you'll want to experience other varieties too.
It's like learning to understand different dialects in your own language.
Exactly. It helps you to connect with more people. Now let's talk about thinking in mental images.
Oh yeah, I like this one. It's about connecting images with words.
It's much more engaging than just memorizing. When you create a vivid image, the word is easier to remember.
So if I'm learning exuberant, I picture someone jumping for joy, really happy.
Perfect. You're connecting the word with a feeling, an action, a visual. It makes a much stronger memory.
And it gets you thinking in English.
Yeah.
You're not translating.
Exactly. No more translation. Another good technique is to create a personal narrative in English.
A narrative.
Tell yourself a story about your life, your dreams, your fears, all in English.
It's like writing a story in my head, but I'm the main character.
Exactly. It's creative, it's engaging.
It's personal.
You're expressing yourself in English, connecting with it on a deeper level, and because it's meaningful, you'll remember the language better.
Turning English learning into self-discovery. I love it.
Yeah.
What about affirmations? Those can be really helpful.
Affirmations are powerful, positive statements you repeat to reprogram your mind.
And they build confidence.
When you say them in English, you're immersing yourself in the language.
Like, I am a confident English speaker.
Perfect example. And the more you say it, the more you start to believe it. And then, of course, be patient.
Always good advice.
It's a process. Don't get discouraged. Every step you take is moving you forward.
Celebrate those small wins.
Recognize your progress. Give yourself credit.
This has been a great discussion.
Yeah.
So many important things to think about.
Lots of tools to help everyone on their journey.
We'll be back soon to wrap it all up.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. We're going to wrap up our conversation about training your brain to think in English.
It's been a great discussion. Lots of great tips and strategies.
It really has. I hope everyone listening feels like they have some new ideas to try out, new tools to help them on their journey to English fluency.
It's important to remember it's a journey, not a race.
It's so easy to get caught up in wanting to learn quickly. But we have to be patient with ourselves and enjoy the process.
You're right. Sometimes I think we forget that learning should be fun. It's about exploring, connecting with new people and ideas.
It should be an adventure.
Yes. Don't get discouraged if you don't see results immediately. Just keep practicing and celebrate those small successes. Every little bit helps.
That's a great point to end on. Enjoy the journey, everyone.
Absolutely. Have fun.
I want to thank Elena for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to all of you out there learning English, keep going. You're doing great.